to Edit Like You Mean It. In this series, we review unpublished first chapters with an editorial eye. Because the chapters are unpublished, and thus you can't read along, we'll be reading the submitted chapters aloud before going into our edits. These are live reads and live edits with no preparation done beforehand. I'm Jack. I'm a longtime writer and developmental editor with a bachelor's in neuroscience. My debut novel was Where the Lightning Goes, which you can find a link to below.
I'm Sarah. I have yet to publish anything. I have my bachelor's in English with a writing concentration. I will be publishing as soon as I'm out of editing hell.
And I'm Jess. I have wanted to be a writer since I was in elementary school, but I have been on a long hiatus just because of work and life, and I'm hoping that doing things like this will help me get right back into it.
Today, we'll be reviewing Chapter 1 of The Curses We Keep by DakotaJ Miller. This is a final draft, which means the author has done multiple rounds of editing and will expect a polished work. It's a gothic horror for adults with a tentative release of May of 2026. First, we'll start with the prologue.
Prologue. The woods sprawled silent, a black maw, swallowing sound, its pines jagged and skeletal against a sky bruised with dusk, their branches clawing upward as if to tear free the last threads of light. Spanish moss draped low, gray shrouds swaying faint, heavy with damp that dripped slow to the earth, each bead glinting like tears frozen mid-fall, splattering the mud with a soft, relentless patter that echoed in her skull like a drum too close. The air thickened, sharp with pine resin and the sour rot of leaves festering black where they fused to the ground, their decay a wet gurgle threading through the stillness, curling into her lungs like smoke she could not cough free. Roots jutted from the soil, gnarled and slick, glistening wet as if the forest bled beneath her boots, their bark peeling faint in strips that caught the wind's low moan, a keening that scraped her spine raw, rising louder as she pressed deeper, a howl that seemed to chase her steps. The old hag crept through the shadows, her gait halting, deliberate, her cloak dragged heavy, its hem sodden with mud and rot, snagging on thorns that tore faint at the fabric, each rip a whisper against the quiet. Behind her trailed a rope, coarse hemp, frayed and thick, its coils rasping over the earth, stolen from a wagon's gear, from reins once tied taut by hands she'd known too well, now a lifeline turned noose, scraping the mud in her wake, its weight a shadow she could not shake. Her breath fogged shallow, ragged bursts, clouding the chill. Her chest ached, a hollow weight pressing her ribs till they creaked, as if the woods squeezed her frail frame tighter with every stumble. She'd entered at the fringe, boots crunching leaves brittle with frost, the river's distant roar a snarl weaving through the trees, pausing as moss brushed her face, cold and damp, like spectral hands trailing her skin, urging her back. She pressed on, tripping over roots that snagged her cloak, the grip clawing at her ankles, mud sucking greedy at her soles, each step a battle against a forest that leaned closer, its pines bowing as if to watch, their needles glinting sharp in the dusk's last gleam. The rope caught, a root's gnarled grasp seizing it mid-drag, jerking her back with a dull thud that shuddered up her arm. Mud clung thicker now, dark clots weighting its fibers, mirroring the decision sinking heavier in her gut, a burden she hauled deeper into the dark. She tugged, hands trembling, gnarled, claw-like, nails split and crusted with dirt as she yanked it free, the hemp grinding wet against the bark, its pull a tether to a choice she could not unmake, a vow carved in the silence of her unraveling. Her face bore time's cruel etchings, once radiant, now a map of fissures carved deep by years she could not reclaim, skin sagging pale and thin over bones that jutted sharp beneath, trembling faint with a cold that sank into her marrow like a tide she could not outrun. Her hands flexed slow. She traced in memory the smooth, unscarred flesh of a girl she'd lost to the dark, small fingers knotting rope under a man's gruff voice, steady hands tying reins she'd stolen hours ago, a woman's call, sharp, defiant, lost to smoke and screams, flickering through a haze she could not grasp. Those hands were strangers now, stooped and broken, dragging their rope through a forest, too eager to claim her, its shadows pooling too thick beneath the moss, writhing faintly as if breathing her despair. The townspeople's whispers trailed her, ghosts woven from their dread, hissed tales of curses and unholy power, their voices muted but piercing, threading through the pines like a web tightening slow, A chorus she'd fled but could not silence. They shrank from her, eyes darting sidelong, hands clutching beads or blades, as if her name might summon her forth from the gloom, a spectre to scorn, a shadow to burn. She'd tried to shield them, cried out against terrors that loomed unseen, their shapes flickering at the edges of her vision, a pyre's blaze, a blade's glint, a child's scream swallowed by mud, but they saw only a witch, a blight to cast out, their fear a blade twisting deeper with every plea she'd choked back, her voice breaking against their scorn. Her heart sagged, misspent years a stone in her chest, dragging her lower as she shuffled deeper, the rope's weight growing, mud caking its coils thicker, a mirror to the anguish that gnawed her soul raw, a noose she'd traced too long through shadows she could not name. She'd watched them from the edges, kin she'd yearned to guard, their faces flickered in her mind's haze, soft and small, laughing by a wagon's wheel, then sharp with terror, hands reaching through flames or sinking into mire she could not claw them from, their cries a thread binding her to a torment that was too painful to bear. Memories lost to time. The forest knew. Its wind rose sharper, howling through the branches, snapping twigs like bones breaking slow. Mud bubbled faintly at her feet, a hiss threading the quiet as she neared a hollow, its earth dipped low, cradled by roots that twisted like veins, pulsing faint, glistening wet in the dusk's frail light. The air oppressive here, damp and heavy, reeking of rot that stung her nose, sharp enough to draw blood from her cracked lips, a taste she swallowed as her resolve hardened, slow and brittle, a choice clawing up from her marrow. She sank to her knees, the rope pulled beside her, sodden and heavy, its coils glistening with mud like a serpent coiled to strike. Her breath trembled, fogging faint as she stared at it, hands shaking with a cold that was not just the night. She'd taken it hours back, fingers fumbling in the dark as reins hung loose, a theft from hands that trusted her, a weight she'd dragged through thorns and mire, each step a question she could not answer. She lifted it slow, its hemp coarse, frayed, stained dark with sweat and time, hesitating as her fingers brushed its knots, trembling violent as she recalled their lessons, their strength, now twisted to this end. She looped it over a branch, sturdy, bowed low, her movements deliberate, each knot a prayer, whispered silent, her hands faltering as bark bit her palms till they bled faint, warm streaks trickling down her wrists, staining the rope red in the dim. The noose settled around her neck, fibers prickling her skin, coarse and cold. Her breath quivered, shallow and thin, fogging the dark as she stood, boots sinking soft into mud that sucked greedy at her soles, holding her like the forest itself refused her flight. This was her offering, a desperate lunge to sever the thread, to flee a cycle that had worn her to this husk, dragging their rope through shadows she'd cast too long. She exhaled, air quivering faint, and stepped from the earth, the branch creaking loud, a groan splitting the silence like a bone snapping slow under the forest's weight. The rope thickened, its bite sharp, then easing, mud-slick coils rasping as her body swung, light and unmoored, droplets falling to splatter the hollow, glinting wet in the dusk's dying spark. The world blurred, trees dimming to black, their jagged limbs fading as relief flooded cold through her veins, a strange tide washing her clean. She'd sought to break the endless reach, the anguish that bound her, but peace slipped beyond her grasp, a ghost she could not hold. Faces flickered, soft at first, then sharp, eyes wide with terror, hands reaching back through a haze of smoke and blood, voices she'd silenced without knowing how, their weight a noose she'd tied herself. The forest pressed closer, pines leaning in, moss swaying like shrouds over a grave ravenous for a tired soul. Its wind howled louder, a dirge weaving through her fading breath, her eyes glazing, hollow and black, glinting wild with a madness that bloomed in her last heartbeat. The witch in the woods, a spectre born of her own unraveling, hanging eternal in a dark she'd never escape, as this was not a world meant for her. End of the prologue.
Okay. Yeah, I think that gives us a pretty good flavor of what the writing style is going to be like. The one thing I would say right now, right off the bat, it does feel like it has gone through layers of polish. However, there is a very, very heavy reliance on purple prose to a degree that is stifling for the reader. because there isn't a sense of rhythm associated with it, and there is a lot of repetition that I would recommend cutting out. And I think at this point, it is an issue of line editing. And so I think it is a legitimate thing to say, like, the line editing has yet to be done on this. And I would highly recommend cutting about half of that chapter in line editing, or prologue, I should say.
I was exhausted reading it. There was just too much repetition, not just of thoughts, but of the sentence structure. There were so many sentences that were just comma after comma after comma, and some of them were, grammatically correct, and others were run-ons. There were a couple of typos as well, not too many, but a couple of typos, and I I had trouble really falling into the story or caring about it because I was just so stuck on the repetition and it's almost a rhythm, but it's not rhythm in a good way. It's rhythm in a, oh God, we're doing this again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of my first notes was that the line rhythm is off. First of all, because it's the exact same rhythm over and over and over again, and it's these very long, drawn out sentences, and that's almost fine, but they also are repetitious of the phrases like as if, like, a very heavy reliance on negative comparison, could not. So basically the purple prose is kind of, it's pretty, but it's competing with itself and becoming where it's just fighting with itself for screen time. I could not half the time envision what was going on. I had no connection to this character at all, even though she's in the midst, I think, of committing suicide. I'm pretty sure.
And that's one of the things where it felt like the suicide was supposed to be a reveal, when it should have been the lead up. I will agree that this does feel polished in that whoever wrote it is a good writer. Assuming that they had people who are not professionals look at this, it makes sense that the non-professionals didn't find things to cut, because people often get blindsided by people who write well. That they're taught to edit for grammatical errors and to edit for things that just sound clunky, and this is almost the definition of purple prose for how much it is long and pretty. I would cut more than half of this. I wouldn't make this more than 2 pages, and I would shoot for a page and a half, because I think that you can do the majority of page 1, followed by skipping down to the second to last paragraph on page 6, where she sinks to her knees and starts tying the noose. I wouldn't make this more than, if you had to, 2.5 pages, but honestly 2. Because you're both right in that there's a lot of just us walking through the woods and then describing how the woods are woods. And they're creepy woods, and that fits the Gothic feel, and that's it. We don't need all of that. And if this is our buying point, where you're trying to get readers to say this is a story worth seeing, then all you're telling us is that you know how to describe someone walking through the woods. It is very pretty. It does not need to be here for the majority of it.
Yeah. I am really offended that you are out competing me for cut recommendations. It hurts my soul and it stings a little bit. So I'm going to say now cut it down to just 1 page.
I would love it to be cut down to a page. I don't think that this author, with how verbose they are, has the capability to cut this down to a page. I don't think they're at that point. I think it would be beautiful if it were just 1 page. I don't think that's something that they could do without sacrificing their current style.
That's fair. Yeah. And it's one of those things where because of the Gothic horror, I was kind of trying to step back and put on my hat of the classics, the older, that really long flowing prose, and I was trying to judge it from that standpoint. So there are probably people who are listening to this who are like, that just completely, like, it's not my taste at all. But that's not, if you're looking for like modern prose, that's not what this is supposed to be even. But one of the problems is, and this is just kind of I think it's a good thing for people to be aware of and remember, is the more you put in, the more you risk repetition and conflict with yourself. So that was one of the things where it's like, every other paragraph, the forest was devouring. We got smoke and fog repeatedly throughout this. The rope shows up.
There are 3 separate notes of her having stolen the rope hours before.
Yes. Yep. In slightly different ways. Twisted is a word that we see a lot of times. And we just don't want that kind of repetition to be occurring at this stage in the manuscript. Like at this point in it. Like, we're 6 pages in, and we do not want to have a list of repetitious words building up already. And part of that is because, like you were kind of saying, the next best step probably for this writer would be learning how to tailor their ability to build purple prose into a more limited format, I'll say. So trimming down your instincts a lot, but also learning how to put it in your voice still.
And in that, because this is so descriptive in a pretty way, also make sure that you are hitting the physical descriptions that actually matter. So I've read this last bit, page 6, 4 times now, and I'm still not sure how she hanged herself. Because she's near a hollow where the earth dips low, but then she kneels and ties the rope around a low branch. And to hang yourself, you have to make it up high. You have to do something that is taller than yourself, or else hanging doesn't work. She kneels, ties it around a low branch, and then it's never stated that, like, we're directly next to a drop-off and thus we can go over. Or if we're next to a drop-off, why couldn't we, like, as we are dying, our bodies are going to go without our consent and grab onto something if it's extremely close, and so you couldn't be near the ground if there is a drop-off either. How did she hang herself while tying something while kneeling on a specifically low branch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just, I don't understand how it works. So those are the details where we would need more space and more actual physical description rather than how glossy and muddy and tree-ish this forest is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that I think is also important to note in that is readers are going to attach themselves to that sort of physical description, the clarity of physical description, much more than they will the beauty of the prose. Every single time.
The most we get is that she stepped from the earth, but I don't know what that means either.
Yep.
How do you step from the earth? Is it off of something?
Maybe she is a witch and she can, like, fly, and she flied herself.
I do assume she is an actual witch, but I guess you can hang yourself upside down, like, into the air.
Mm-hmm. That would be terrifying.
That, again, it would. And it also needs a description if that were the case.
Especially, yeah. Dang.
Dude, can you imagine walking through a woods and you, like, find this body hanging from a tree upside down? Like, I would die.
I'm just hoping that it was overly flowery and that chapter 1 will be more reasonable, and that is all.
I will say that I both think that, like, something, her killing herself and her being a witch, is intense enough that, like, yes, this prologue sets the tone in a way that would make a prologue feel necessary. And I also wonder if it's going to be mentioned later, or referred to later, because there are people like myself who will always skip the prologue. And so while, like, the prologue should be important, and also whatever happens should be at some point included in the actual text. And so that's not a reference on whether or not it's there or any sort of good or bad, but just a note to the author that people will skip over the prologue.
All right. Chapter 1. The wagon jolted over rutted earth, its creaks a faint echo of the sea Ernest York had left behind, a vast, fickle beast that had swallowed men whole, their screams lost to waves he'd once cursed as kin, their salt still clinging to his bones like a second skin, a ghost he could not scrub free. His hands, roughened by years on salt-slick decks, gripped the reins tight, knuckles whitening, calluses catching on leather worn smooth by storms, guiding the horse through Charleston's dusk-drenched wilds. Pines and oaks clawed the sky, their jagged limbs tangled with Spanish moss drooping like gray veils, trailing cold and damp against his cheek as they swayed, ghostly threads weaving through the dimming light, brushing his neck with a chill that sank deeper than the evening's bite, a whisper of an echo of an eternal dusk stirring in the gloom. The air pressed thick, humid, alive, coiling around them with a weight that seeped into his lungs, heavy with the reek of silt and pine, a sour rot lurking beneath like a grave too shallow, its stench curling up from the earth in faint wisps that stung his nose, sharp as a memory he could not bury. Beside him, Iris sat rigid, her arms curled around their daughter Cassandra, who dozed against her shoulder, her breath soft, a fragile thread against the stillness, her small frame bundled in a shawl streaked with road dust, its edges fraying where her fingers clutched it tight, her sleep a shield Ernest envied. His jaw clenched, eyes flicking to the trees, dark hollows gaping like mouths, shadows stretching, too long, beneath the moss-draped boughs, the forest thrumming with a pulse he could not name, gnawing at his gut like a tide turning wrong, a rhythm he'd felt on decks before the sky split and the sea claimed its due. The sea had carved its lessons deep, trussed it like a man, fierce and ready to betray in a heartbeat, its lessons etched in scars and silence across his weathered frame. Years hauling nets had marked him, forearms corded with burns from ropes snapping taut, cuts from hooks glinting in the dark, memories locked tight in his chest, their edges sharp with dread he would not voice, ghosts that trailed him south like shadows cast by a lantern he could not douse. The wagon rattled as he adjusted the reins. His fingers brushed the coiled rope tied to the board, a thick hemp line weathered from tying sails, a lifeline he'd kept since a squall took half his crew off Virginia's coast. He lashed himself to the mast that night, rope biting his wrists till they bled. The seas roared, drowning Tom's grin as a wave swept him under, Eli's shout swallowed by the wind as the ship groaned, splintering under the weight, its timbers cracking like bones beneath a hammer. Ernest had clung there, hours bleeding into dawn, breath fogging sharp in the storm's aftermath, rain lashing his face as he cut the rope free, its hemp stained with salt and blood, a vow he'd carried to this land, no more lost, not to sea nor shore. He'd stood on that deck alone, the horizon a bruise of gray, watching gulls circle where men had sunk, their cries a dirge he'd borne south, a weight heavier than the rope now glinting faintly in the lantern's sway. Steady now, he muttered, more to himself than the horse, urging it onward, hooves thudding dull against the earth, the reins creaking under strain as the sea's ghosts hissed in the rustle of leaves, a low murmur, almost words, curling through the dusk like a warning he could not parse, a tide he could not outrun. A twig cracked sharp beyond the pines. Ernest's head turned, eyes raking the gloom, moss swaying faint as if parted by a shadow too quick to catch, his breath hitching as the sound faded, swallowed by the forest's hum. Iris shifted beside him, her healer's hands resting still, fingers brushing the worn leather pouch at her waist, yarrow and sage rustling faintly as she leaned forward, sharp eyes scanning the road ahead, then the woods beyond, her gaze piercing the gloom like a blade seeking flesh. "It's too quiet," she murmured, voice low, taut as a bowstring. Her eyes traced the trees where moss swayed, ghostly in the dimming light, its tendrils weaving slow and deliberate, as if the wind gave them secrets to share with one another. She'd paused earlier, reins slack in Ernest's grip, to kneel by a ditch a mile back, her skirt brushing damp earth as she plucked herbs from the roadside, their edges curling black, wilted in a way that defied the humid warmth, their stems brittle as if kissed by frost no season could claim. "The air's wrong here," she'd said. Then, louder now, her breath curling in delicate wisps as she crushed a leaf between her fingers, its sap staining them green, a bitter tang rising sharp enough to sting her nose, her jaw tightening as she wiped it on her skirt, the stain lingering like a mark she could not shed. "It's too thick. Harder to breathe. Feels like the air itself is watching us." She'd stuffed the wilted sprigs into her pouch, hands steady but her brow creased, muttering about signs she'd seen north of Danvers, plants gone sour before a storm, a stillness that preceded screams, a weight in the air she'd stitched men through when fever took them too fast. A branch snapped deep in the trees, sudden, jarring. Her head jerked, eyes narrowing at the dark beyond, her hand flexing as if to ward off a shadow she could not name, her fingers itching for a blade she did not carry, her stance rooted like an oak braced for wind she'd faced before. Ernest grunted, nudging the horse faster. There's something queer about this place, but I ain't never seen no sirens despite them legends, and I'm not about to start thinking the air's alive. It's superstition, that's all it is. His grip tightened, the rope's coil a lifeline he could not shake as the forest hum pulsed louder, a heartbeat threading through the silence. Iris nodded in agreement, but there was something she could not shake. Yes, the air was thicker here. She was sure that would make planting herbs much easier. However, it felt as though they were being watched. Perhaps not the air, but there was a type of spirit that seemed to be in the air. Maybe this journey was not as wise as they hoped. Perhaps they were on edge from the superstitions of their past. They'd stopped twice before dusk. First by a creek an hour past, its trickle faint against the pine's rustle, where Ernest reined the horse to check the wagon's axle, its wood groaning under the weight of their flight south, its grain splintered from a jolt days back. Iris had stepped down, boots scuffing the earth, kneeling to sift through the undergrowth, her fingers brushing roots and leaves, her breath hitching as she found a cluster of sage twisted gray, its scent sour where it should have been sharp, its leaves crumbling to dust in her grip. Was that a deer we heard back there? Iris asked her husband. A deer does not just snap a twig or two. You hear 4 steps, not 1, Ernest thought. While he entertained the legends of the sea, he was not a man to believe in ghosts, witches, or sirens. While the air was thick, Ernest could not help but agree with his wife that it felt like they were being watched. They had passed some engines through their journey down, and it would make sense that more were watching curiously. Ernest had nodded to Iris and then stated, "That or them engines watching us. No reason to be spooked." His hand lingering on the rope as he tied it tighter, its hemp rough against his palm, its weight a comfort against the unease coiling in his chest, a tether to a past he could not leave. Time to move on, he'd rasped, climbing back, the wagon creaking as they rolled deeper, his eyes scanning the horizon where the river's roar grew, a growl weaving through the wilds like a thread he could not cut, its pulse a mirror to the dread he'd felt when the sea turned black and took what he could not hold fast. The second stop came at a clearing, pines thinning briefly, the sky a bruise of purple bleeding into gray, where Ernest halted to water the horse, its flanks lathered from the pace, steam rising from its breath in the cooling air. A low wail threaded the wind, faint, fleeting. Iris's gaze darted left, hand tightening on Cassandra, the horse snorting as Ernest urged it faster, his jaw clenching as the cry dissolved into the pines, a whisper too close. Iris had wandered to the edge, her skirt swaying as she knelt again, fingers tracing a patch of yarrow, its flowers drooping black, their stems soft and rotten beneath her touch, a decay she'd seen once in a Danvers field before the accusations flew. "It's an omen," she'd muttered, her voice sharp now, rising over the creek's faint gurgle, her eyes flicking to Ernest as she stood, wiping her hands on her apron, the green-brown smear a stain she could not erase. "Feels like it's waiting. Waiting for the earth is waiting for the... what? Waiting for the earth is waiting to swallow up something. Good or bad, I know not." She'd glanced at Cassandra, still dozing then, her hand resting on the girl's shoulder, a shield against a threat she could not name, her breath spilling into frantic wisps as she climbed back, the wagon lurching forward, the rope's coil swaying faintly as Ernest urged them on, its hemp glinting dull in the lantern's frail light. The wagon slowed near a riverbank now, its waters glinting like a blade in the fading light, cutting through the heavy warmth with a wild roar, its surface flecked with foam that churned restless, swirling in patterns that caught the lantern's glow like eyes blinking awake. Ernest swung down, boots squelching in damp soil, kissed by the wet, not stinking deep but clinging cold, and began unloading gear. Blankets coarse with salt stains from shipboard nights, a kettle dented from a fall on deck, the rope coiled tight beside it, its hemp frayed but sure, glinting faintly as he set it by the wheel, his fingers brushing it once more, a habit born of storms he could not forget. His movements were sharp, eyes darting to the tree line where shadows pooled unbroken beneath the moss, the air sharpening with a chill that was not just dusk, a bite that sank into his bones like the sea's cold after a man went under, a weight he'd carried too long. "Settle in," he said, his voice gravelly but taut, a sailor's edge honed by years watching horizons turn. His hand brushed the whalebone knife at his belt, its carved curves cool under his thumb, its edge of quiet promise he'd kept since Danvers turned on them. Iris nodded, stepping down, her skirt caught on a splintered board, tearing faint as she glanced at the river, its pulse thundering loud, a force she'd stitched men against when it claimed them too soon, her hand steadying Cassandra as the girl stirred, blinking awake into a world that seemingly had not stirred. Cassandra's eyes fluttered open, hair tangled from sleep, streaked with dust and damp, her gaze bleary against the dimming sky, shadows dancing in their depths, like shapes she could not name nor shake, a flicker of something vast peering back. "Are we there, Father?" Her voice was soft, fragile, a thread of innocence the world had not yet snapped, though the woods leaned closer, their silence pressing her chest tight, a weight she felt in her ribs like a hand squeezing slow, a pulse she could not place. She'd sat quiet earlier, knees drawn up on the wagon's bench, watching the moss sway as they rolled. Its cirrus... Is that supposed to be like Cicerus? Its cirrus weaving figures in her mind, a woman cloaked, reaching through the dark, swaying in a wind she could not feel, thoughts she shook off, souring fast as Danvers' whispers crept in, tales of witches her mother had hushed with a glare, her father's grunt a wall against their sting. She'd lingered there, breath drifting in spectral wisps, imagining a shadow stepping free, its hands curling toward her, a curiosity prickling her spine she did not voice. A door creaking open in her skull she slammed shut, her fingers twisting the shawl tighter as the images looped, relentless. She had watched longer at the creek, kneeling by Iris as her mother sifted herbs, her eyes tracing the water's edge, seeing shapes in the ripples, a face unnaturally pale, eyes suspiciously deep. "Nearly, Cassie," Ernest said now, his smile forced, tight at the edges, a mask over the unease clawing his gut, his tone sharpening as he pointed to the river, its roar a growl beneath his words. "Fetch water for us. Pail's there. Do not wander off too far." Dread coiled tighter as she nodded, slipping away, her small frame swallowed fast by the dusk, the pail swinging in her grip like a pendulum, marking time she did not know she'd lose, its metal glinting dull as she trudged toward the bank, her boots scuffing earth as it changed from grass, dry dirt, sand, then a cool mud. The ground softened under her, mud clinging cold, seeping through the leather, its chill kissing her toes as the river's pulse thundered in her ears, jarring the silence with force her father's tales had warned of. Treacherous as if a lion, ready to claim the unwary, its roar a beast she could not tame. She knelt, pale scraping stone with a shrill grate, watching the current churn, her reflection rippling in the black surface, face stretched, eyes sinking into shadow, hair fraying wild like the moss overhead, a girl she barely knew staring back. Her thoughts twisted. What if power lay beyond the rules she'd been taught? Knowledge could unlock it, a door creaking wider, a shadow stepping closer, its hands reaching. She shook her head, the notion souring fast, bile rising in her throat as Danvers' voices hissed louder. Witch's spawn, devil's child. Words her mother had drowned with a glare, her father with a fist, but they lingered, sharp as thorns. No, she did not want this, did not know wrong until it crept too close, too late to turn back, too alone with the river's snarl and the wood's weight pressing her down. A twig snapped behind her, faint, near, the water's ripple warped again, a flicker where none should be, a shadow stretching too long, too thin, too real. She spun, breath snagging, the pail clattering against the stone, water sloshing cold over her hands, soaking her sleeves as she froze, heart slamming against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. A cloaked figure loomed on her side of the river, a gaunt, its hood shadowing a face strangely pale, black hollow eyes piercing her, glinting wild with fractured terror, tears streaking sunken cheeks in the half-light, glistening wet like blood frozen mid-fall, a sheen that caught the dusk and held it cruelly. Its mouth gaped, a manic grin splitting wide, teeth glinting faint. Its hand rose, gnarled and trembling, nails jagged and split as it reached, clawing the air across the distance, fingers curling slow with a desperation that clawed her gut. A hunger she felt in her marrow that she could not name. No sound came, just that stare, raw and lost, flicking to some unseen void as if seeing her through a haze she could not pierce, its frame hunched as if broken by time, bones jutting beneath tattered fabric in angles too sharp, too wrong, a spectre forged from rot and grief. "Who are you?" Cassandra whispered, voice quaking, dread coiling cold in her spine. Her faith buckled, the ground tilting as a verse flickered, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch," and her world shrank to that reaching hand, its tremble a mirror to her own shaking breath, a terror too old to grasp. The figure began cackling an unholy sound. Cassandra was terrified when she heard the figure shudder. A guttural "No!" that tore from its throat, raw and anguished. A plea echoing off the pines like a scream from Cassie's nightmares. Sinking claws into her bones, a sound that gnawed her skull raw with terror. Her heart slammed against her ribs, each beat a plea to flee. Her mind screaming, "It knows me, it sees me." She stumbled right, boots slipping in mud. The figure mirroring her, jerky and unhinged, its cloak snapping, spraying rot-soaked leaves like flesh flayed from a corpse. Her chest burned. River's grip or this thing's gaze? Fear choked her, a vice tightening her throat, her pulse a frantic drum drowning her thoughts. She lurched back, the figure surging closer, its eyes a blade pinning her, wild with a terror that echoed her own, its frail frame defying its speed, twigs cracking sharp under its weight, branches bending as it shoved through, relentless. She bolted, veering through trees, branches clawing her shawl, tearing faint as her fear spiked, a cold sweat prickling her skin, her mind flashing to the river's mud sucking her boots, that night's shadow looming. The figure's cry, "No!" split the air again, a howl she could not outrun, weaving through the dusk like a dirge, threading her marrow with dread. Her lungs seared, boots skidded on moss, each glance back a stab of panic, its hand stretched higher, trembling violently, fingers curling slow as if to drag her into its hollow gaze, madness glinting wet in its tears, its face sharper now, skin peeling at the edges, eyes sunk into black hollows, a twisted reflection of her own terror, old and broken, a mirror she could not unsee. She veered left, breath spilling in frantic threads, roots snagging her boots, pain flaring as brambles raked her arms, blood welling beneath her sleeves, warm and sticky, each drop a pulse of fear, screaming, "It's closer, it's here." The figure's wail rose, piercing, clawing the sky, shattering the dusk and sinking deeper into her skull, her vision blurring with tears, her chest heaving with sobs she could not voice. She ducked under a bough, moss trailing cold across her neck like a noose's brush, its damp weight a shiver that fed her terror, whispering, "You cannot escape." Her foot caught a stone, twisting her ankle, pain lancing hot as she staggered. The river's roar swelling closer, its pulse a trap. The figure closed in, cloak snapping like a tattered wing, its hand trembling with a violence that shook its frame, fingers curling tighter, clawing the dark as if to drag her into a void she could not fathom, its eyes glinting with madness that broke her own. Tears frozen on its ravaged face, a mask of desolation she knew too well. She pushed forward, branches snapping under her weight, leaves clinging wet to her boots. One last glance back. Its grin widened, a silent scream splitting its face as it lunged, cloak flaring wide, a shadow swallowing the world. Her scream tore free. "Help!" raw, braying as she veered again, the river's edge gleaming ahead. Its cry rose, shattering the air. "No!" A plea that broke into a sob, echoing loud, long and loud, a sound that clawed the sky and would not fade, driving her forward as madness bled into its gaze, a realization she felt in her gut she could not name. She leapt, cold swallowing her whole. The current seized her with icy claws, dragging her down, her scream drowned. Bubbles bursting as she clawed at the water, fingers scraping rocks and roots. Nails tore, blood streaking the current, until she snagged a branch, its bark biting her palms, hauling herself onto the muddy bank, gasping as the howl faded into the trees, resolute, like a choice carved in silence, a weight she could not shed. She lay there, mud slick against her skin, breath ragged, exhaustion pinning her to the earth as the forest stilled, the hag's cry a ghost lingering in the air, its weight a stoning laying on her mind, a shadow she'd run from and into all at once. Her vision swam, shapes flickered at the tree line, silhouettes bleeding from the gloom. Too many, too close. Cloaks swayed faint, beads glinting dull in the dusk as they moved, slow and deliberate. Boots rustling leaves with a rhythm that sank into her bones, a pulse she could not match. Her breath hitched, hands trembling as she clutched the branch. Blood streaked her fingers, dark and sticky, pooling in the mud as the figures loomed nearer, their outlines sharpening against the river's snarl, eyes glinting faint, unreadable, a tide closing in she could not outrun. End of chapter 1.
That was a lot.
I am dying.
Yeah. It's pretty clear the problems in the prologue have carried over into the first chapter as well. Sometimes they will differ pretty significantly between a prologue and a first chapter. In this case, that did not happen. And I think I have like two big points that I want to discuss, but I have taken some notes on them. So I don't know if you guys have some initial thoughts to kind of get through before, because I think both of them will kind of take a little bit of time to explain, I guess.
Like you said, the same problems from the prologue persisted here, and probably because I was expecting it, they felt even more exaggerated. There was that same repetition of the same patterns, a lot of that she could not, that he could not.
Yeah. I actually wrote like a blank, he could not blink.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
The commas, and then the commas are not, I think perhaps in this chapter even more so, they're not always grammatically correct in a way that makes them confusing.
The sentences are incredibly long.
Yes. Yes, they are very, very long, and some of them are long and grammatically correct, but a good number of them
Many of them are not.
Yeah. So it's difficult to follow. And also the pacing is wacky. Everything is really, really slow, but then her dad tells her not to wander off, and immediately she's wandered off.
Well, and doesn't he send her off?
He does.
Yeah, but he's like, don't go too far. Don't get lost. And then she's immediately lost.
But also go to the river.
Yeah, I don't know.
And get water. Because we're not lost. We went to the river to get water. On Dad's orders.
It's possible that I missed it too, but I don't know what happened to the pail she was carrying. Like once she got frightened by the figure, it just didn't exist anymore.
I think for me, where the lost feeling came from is that she went far enough that her parents don't realize that, even if she's just imagining this, which I don't think is meant to be the case, her parents don't notice that she's freaking the fuck out.
Well, one of the things is that when she goes to the river, and this might be purposefully left out by the author to make it plausible, but there is no thought in her that I need to run back to my parents. Like most of us, when we get scared, when we see something, we want to run to safety, and for her, that would be the carriage. But all she does is run in a random direction, and then when she can't think of a way to escape, pops into the river, which is the extra double lost. But assuming that she went to the river that was close enough that the father didn't think it'd be wandering off to go there, it should be a pretty straight shot back to her parents. And so by not mentioning that we're trying to get back to the parents or whatnot, then it kind of circumvents the fact that she just ran off in a random direction.
Yeah.
But that still feels like it should have been her goal, and that something else should have stopped her from getting back to them easily.
It feels to me like the author just wants to linger in the long, we'll call them eloquent descriptions of the depressing or scary things or the stuff weighing them down, and doesn't spend any time on more normal things that would happen.
I think the way that I have kind of put it is that the author is lingering in the prose and is sacrificing everything else to it. And unfortunately, the prose it's not even as strong as it really should be if you were going to do that. Because there is an element of literary where it really doesn't matter that much. And I'm saying that with a little bit of pain, but it really doesn't matter that much if the tactile details are realistic. It doesn't really matter if anything is clear, as long as the prose is very, very pretty. But unfortunately, in this case, the prose is extremely repetitious. The word choices are very repetitious. I again started making a list of the words that I just kept coming up. The salt, the hemp, the brushing, the boots, the sticky blood. Blood is not sticky whenever it's first coming out. And you're not touching it, so it's not sticky at all in a situation where it's coming out of your arms. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like these details are just kind of shoved in just very haphazardly. And I think that's the problem, is the prose is very haphazard, and it cannot be in a situation like this. The prose has to be pristine for something like this to work. Editing Sarah here. One of the things I wanted to address further after we had concluded recording was to substantiate a little bit more my comment that I didn't believe this was good writing necessarily, and that it was fine, but not necessarily what I would call good. I actually did some analysis of it because I think you can hear very well when we read the chapter the repetitious rhythm of the lines, and that was something that we did let Dakota know about, and I believe he has since remediated. The way that he writes is a style that needs really good line editing, but I wasn't entirely satisfied with just this needs a line edit. I was kind of curious as to why. And so I did a little bit of a deep dive on this, and it was actually very fascinating. Because I knew Dakota was trying to write in an older style of writing for sort of this Gothic horror, I went to Dickens actually, just for sort of an older style as well. And it's really funny to me because I think a lot of people will use Dickens as an example of wordiness, but if you actually analyze his sentences, they're very well put together. And this is something that I think a lot of writers need to understand and do not very well. And that's one of the reasons why I sort of wanted to make this little insert, even though it does, I think, derail the thought a little bit here. But the sentence from Dickens, and this is, again, what we turned over to Dakota because I wanted to go a little bit more in depth on this. But the sentence from Dickens that I pulled was just, it was literally a random one that I found. And it reads as follows. There seemed to be something very comical in the reputation of Mr. Brooks of Sheffield, for both the gentlemen laughed heartily when he was mentioned, and Mr. Murdstone was a good deal amused also. It has a very nice flow to it, but if you break it down, there are 52 syllables and 34 words in the sentence, and you can actually break down the word type as follows, okay? So bear with me for a moment. I'm just going to go and kind of roll through these, and you can sort of hear, though, what is being used most often and in what order. And you'll see this on the screen as well. So if you're curious what this looks like, I will be showing it right now. So we have an adverb, a verb, a preposition, a verb, a pronoun, an adjective, a preposition, a definite article, a noun, a preposition, a proper noun, a preposition, a proper noun, preposition, adjective, definite article, a noun, verb, adverb, conjunction, pronoun, verb, conjunction, proper noun, verb, indefinite article, adjective, noun, verb, adverb, okay? Now you can just hear the way that those are mixed up. That even sounds like it's going to give the sentence a very lively movement to it. And the conjunctions are a really critical piece, actually, and as you'll see once we get to the analysis of Dakota's sentences. So it breaks out to, though, essentially 7 verbs, 5 prepositions, 4 adjectives, 3 adverbs, 3 proper nouns, 3 nouns, 2 pronouns, 2 definite articles, 2 conjunctions, and 1 indefinite article. Now, I also pulled a random sentence from Dakota's work, and I just want you to listen to how this sounds on the page again, and then we'll break down exactly why it sounds this way. His hand lingering on the rope as he tied it tighter, its hemp rough against his palm, its weight a comfort against the unease coiling in his chest, a tether to a past he could not leave. So in this, there are 47 syllables and 37 words in the sentence, and the breakdown is as follows. Pronoun, noun, adjective, preposition, definite article, noun, adverb, pronoun, verb, pronoun, adjective, pronoun, noun, adjective, preposition, pronoun, noun, indefinite article, noun, preposition, definite article, noun, verb, preposition, pronoun, noun, indefinite article, noun, preposition, indefinite article, adjective, pronoun, verb, adverb, verb. So this breaks out to 4 verbs, 5 prepositions, 4 adjectives, 2 adverbs, 0 proper nouns, 9 nouns, 8 pronouns, 2 definite articles, 0 conjunctions, and 3 indefinite articles. And this is a very exemplary sentence. Now that balance is just all kinds of off. We have far too many nouns, far too many pronouns, and not enough conjunctions. Conjunctions are the point where the reader is allowed to turn the sentence in their mind. They're so critical because they're just a little breaking point. They sort of act like a comma, and they tie ideas together. So whenever we have multiple ideas in a sentence, we really, really, really want those conjunctions to be in there. But the overuse of the nouns is definitely the culprit here. But you can even hear whenever I'm reciting again, the way that the words are laid out, it's very blocky. It is very, it sounds the same. It doesn't have a good sense of rhythm. And this is where the sound of the words on the page really comes into play, because one of the things that you'll find with older writing, especially if you're having trouble getting into it, one of the best things that you can possibly do is to read it out loud, because it is beautiful. It has a very good pace, a good rhythm. A lot of writers in past times, they had a sort of innate sense of the art of language, because that was a core piece of language being taught, literature being taught, writing being taught. It was as much an art as a skill. Now we teach it just as a skill, and we don't really learn the artistry part of it. But that's one of the reasons why there's a very melodic sound to a lot of older writing. And that's why whenever you want to immerse yourself in Shakespeare, whenever you want to immerse yourself in Shakespeare plays, they're meant to be presented aloud. So that's another thing. Like, if I don't know why we do this thing where we're going to read Shakespeare. It's very silly. Read Shakespeare aloud if you're going to read it. But you'll notice that with pretty much any older writer is that their work really does well when you read it aloud. And that is because, again, you can hear that rhythm, and the flow of the words is very nice. So to emulate an older writing style, that's really what you want to pay attention to, is that flow and that rhythm of the language on the page. So that's just kind of an observation that I wanted to clarify a little bit for you guys, because I thought it would be useful. It's a very underserved part of writing right now. So, if that helps anybody to kind of understand a little bit better why their writing may sound flat, that may be the reason why. It may just be that the way you are setting up your sentences is not using the sort of dynamic changes in language or laying it out in a way that is nice for the reader. So that's just a great thing to pay attention to. It's not something you have to worry about in a first draft. It's not even something you have to worry about in a second draft. This is line editing, and line editing is, I think, as underserved as developmental editing, unfortunately. We'll hopefully talk about that as a topic more in depth later on, because line editing is one of my favorite things. But yeah, I just, like I said, wanted to kind of go through this and point out exactly why the sentences sound the way they do. And just let you know, too, you're not crazy. There's a reason why it kind of has this sort of very repetitious sound to it. And that's the reason why. It comes down to this overuse of nouns, overuse of pronouns, and an underuse of those conjunctions that would let us as the readers pause and breathe. But okay, I think that's everything I had to cover. Back to your regularly scheduled programming.
So a part of that is a misunderstanding of pacing in the horror genre, including this more old world horror genre, forcing more toward classic. And that's that this person, two parts to this, are trying way too hard for show don't tell, because we're showing literally everything. And that slows the pace way down to the point that, like, whenever she was looking at this monster and thinking about running and then starting to run, it felt like it was in slow motion because there were so many descriptors that time felt slower. It felt like we were still standing there for a minute or whatnot while Jess read through these 3 descriptions for every single item. And B, and the real problem here is that this author is trying to hold tension indefinitely. Mm-hmm. Every single sentence is written to make you feel like it's dark and deadly and ominous and something bad is going to happen. But none of that's actually coming through in what we're doing. And so rather than letting you breathe, they're saying, I've written it in a way that is dark and ominous. And so we're supposed to feel tension, what we don't know why for, and then the tension that you should have gotten from, like, oh, there's a beast behind us. It was already lingering there, and so we're like, okay, we've been here. Like, we were already tense-ish just from all of your dark descriptors. What else? And then we can't go up, and then we also lose it because we don't care, because we've been tense for too long. It's similar to if you watched a horror movie and they played the ominous music throughout the entire thing.
Yes. Yes.
That ominous music only works in an ominous moment.
Yeah. The high-pitched violin is just like the whole time. Mm-hmm. You're just like, stop it.
Yeah, you can't keep it throughout the entire thing. You can't.
No. Yeah. So there were also just some general errors, and these are kind of like, I'll call them a little bit broader too, because again, I see this happen a lot. One of the things that we did throughout this chapter was do this back and forth of time. So it was like one paragraph we were present, and then we went like a paragraph and this had happened. And then we were present again, and then this had happened.
Every character got a little mini backstory of just this journey.
Yes, and it was completely unnecessary. I think we got 4 times of seeing the mother stooping for herbs or sorting herbs or messing with herbs.
And that kind of made sense because they wanted to show that this was all happening simultaneously, but we don't need 4 things of all happening simultaneously.
Well, and it's one of those things where, I kind of already said this with the prologue, when you are including so much, you're increasing your odds of making a serious mistake. So this whole thing of like, oh, the woods are so ominous, and the parents are very concerned about it. Like, they're talking about it. They're like, yeah, this is super weird. And then they send their child off alone to fetch water.
I thought the same thing.
No, it's fine. She'll be fine.
Yeah, I guess.
Gets hunted by a monster.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, that makes no sense. If you wanted to make it so that they didn't have those feelings, then maybe that would make sense. You could have a situation where the child wandered off alone because apparently the child is prone to wandering.
I also don't know how old this child is.
That's true. Yeah.
Because part of it seemed like a small child, like 7 or 8. Part of it seemed like she was like 16 or something. and then part of it, like, you get a middle ground of 12, maybe. But it was very unclear as to how old this was supposed to be, which changes drastically how we view the scene.
Yeah. Well, and then, so here's another thing, though, too. And this is, again, where it's just like there's so much detail that we're given and so much information coming at us. Another thing that I did not understand was if she was staring at the figure or running from it. Because many times during her, like, I'm running away sequence, we were talking about the thing's face. And I'm like, is it ahead of her? Because if it's ahead of her, then she needs to turn around and go the other way. Like, you know what I mean? So it's just like one of those things where I'm like, are you running at this? How are you staring into its eyes right now? That are deep voids that are, you know, something of the cosmos, that are, you know, promising mayhem and chaos and sadness and death or something. You know what I mean? Like it's just one of those things, again, because we're so interested in the prose and we're so interested in, like you said, Jack, it's like this, we have to make it constantly tense. We have to convey in everything constantly this sense of terror and dread, and it starts fighting with itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this author does write pretty prose. They need someone to talk to them about pacing and how these prose impact pacing, especially in a horror. Like, I really like the general sentence structure of, like, 3 descriptors for one thing, but they only work if you do it, like, once per chapter, because it is very specifically artistic and tries to put equal emphasis on all 3 things. It's like, think of it this way and this way and this way, because this is an important point that hits in a lot of different directions. If you do that for all of the things, then none of them become important. And that's one of the real tragedies of having so much good description. Like, it gets repetitious because you're describing the same things a lot, but the way that they, like, describe the weight of the rope and, like, the fibers against the palm and things like that, those are good descriptors if they hadn't been repetitious.
Yep.
And when you have so much description everywhere, then we have no idea what we're supposed to pay attention to, we as the readers. There's no focal point because everything seems equally important.
Well, and I'm going to say that this is fine prose, but it is an emulation of good prose. It is not good prose itself. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because I think one of the major things, and this is something that writers need to be very, very careful with, especially in the literary space, is that your sentences and your paragraphs need to be internally consistent. Because one of the things, and that's sort of one of the little tangents that I had whenever I was going through this, is if you go through and just pick out any of these given sentences, it's not that they are just a long sentence, it's that they are internally inconsistent. So let me, because I actually pulled one of these out that I thought was particularly egregious. I think it starts with the dialogue of, like, steady on. And then it goes into, he muttered, more to himself than the horse, urging it onward, hooves thudding dull against the earth, the reins creaking under strain, as the sea's ghosts hissed in the rustle of leaves, a low murmur, almost words, curling through the dusk like a warning he could not parse, a tide he could not outrun. All of those things are different things. So he muttered more to himself than the horse. But then he actually is urging it onward. So he is actually talking to the horse. The hooves thudding dull against the earth, he is still the subject of this. Mm-hmm. So his hooves are thudding dull against the earth. Mm-hmm. Reins creaking under strain. The reins are not creaking under strain. There is no strain on these reins at all because it's pulling a cart. And he's holding them loose because that's how you hold reins. As the sea's ghosts hissed in the rustle of leaves, that's fine. A low murmur, almost words, curling through the dusk like a warning he could not parse. Like a warning, just don't put the like in there. You don't need a like. It is a warning he could not parse in a way. Like, that's a low murmur, almost words. We already have that like close to a thing. So you don't need another, this is close to a thing. And then a tide he could not outrun. What does that even mean in this context? The sea's ghosts hissed in the rustle of leaves, a low murmur, almost a warning. But then it's a tide he can't outrun. But are the murmurs a tide he can't outrun? Is he trying to outrun them? I thought they were a warning.
No, and that's definitely something where we're continuing to move along in the scene and change focal points outside of the sentence, that the author keeps changing the focal point, but we're just expected to go along with it, because the tide that he couldn't outrun would be the warning them of something that you could not outrun. So like, is how I took it. But it's definitely, it's like you said, with the hooves would refer to him. There's no subject. Like we need more periods.
We need more periods, yes.
We need more periods.
Yes. Please stop your sentences.
But we also need a central theme to the sentences as well. Because if you he muttered more to himself than the horse, as the sea's ghost hissed in the rustle of leaves, a low murmur, almost words, curling through the dusk, a warning he could not parse. That's a good stop. You just cut out the tactile details with the horse, because we don't need them. And like I said, it muddies it and bounces our attention from place to place. And then, like you said, you don't know exactly what the tide he could not outrun is referring to. I also don't. I mean, I could take a guess, but the problem is I shouldn't have to guess, because what you're making me do then is stop in my little brain and consider what the fuck was I just told? And that's where you end up at the end of almost every single sentence, because they all have this multiple subjects, conflicting similes, and no focus as far as like what it's trying to tell us. And that's the problem. And that's why I say it's kind of more of an attempt at purple prose than it is actual purple prose, because the nice thing about good purple prose is that it is at least still consistent. It is communicating something that is one big picture. It's not just thrown together haphazardly. This is very haphazard.
So that's where we differ. I consider purple prose anything that is overly descriptive. I don't think purple prose necessarily means it's good.
I actually come in on kind of, I don't know, there's Sarah on one end, and then there's
Jack,
and then there's me, I think. Because I always just thought purple prose was a bad thing inherently.
Well, I guess whenever I say purple prose, then, since apparently that may need to be defined, whenever I say purple prose, I just mean more of the long literary style of writing, where the point is the prose itself, as opposed to the story, the characters, and things like that. That's pretty much all I mean by it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It just is a thing.
Yeah. And when people like it, it's usually because it's done well. And whenever you're writing academically, then purple prose is frowned upon. That's something you do hear often in middle school and high school as something that you shouldn't do. And so from an academic setting, which most people don't learn to write outside of that, then they are just told purple prose is something to avoid.
That's not entirely true, though, because once you get to college, it's like, I would almost say like that flips. So I think, yeah, in
Yeah, which is why it's middle school and high school.
Yeah. I learned it from the Neopets role-playing boards.
Of course. How could
That's
we
normal.
Leave that
Totally
out?
normal.
Middle school, high school, and the Neopets role-playing board.
Yep.
Yes. I'm really glad that we don't have like cameras for this, because the look of perplexity on my face just then.
Oh my god.
I think it would have been a stronger curse than anything I could have said.
Something that is... let's start by me saying that for this chapter, I would start with her almost at the river. I would cut everything before Cassandra almost at the river. all of those notes of like, oh, this is an ominous, look at this yarrow thing, and look at like how the air is pressing down on us. That can be said afterwards when we go back to the parents and their daughter is gone, or her walking through the woods alone. Like that is not necessary to start. They just exist. The story starts when she's almost at the river, and that picks up and goes. I would cut everything before that. That said, whenever you were reading just the description of the dad tying himself to the mast and then people getting swallowed by the storm, I immediately thought, okay, we're in a world where sirens exist. Because he has tied himself to the mast, which is what you do when a siren is out there, and because someone was smiling as they got swept away by the water, which is usually someone that is under a siren spell. Like, you're not smiling otherwise if it's just like a huge storm at sea. Unless you have to very specifically be like, they're welcoming their death in this fearful moment or whatever. Like, you have to change that because that is exactly what a siren attack looks like. And you've already said we're in some sort of magical olden world. And then there were 2 or 3 references after that of how he didn't believe specifically in sirens. And so that part confused me because he described a siren attack. And so if you're going to specifically say, no, sirens don't exist, don't describe what looks like a siren attack right before that.
Yeah, I was very pettily annoyed by the whole sea scene that we did get. That sounds like a typo that I just said, but I meant sea.
Pettily.
Scene. No, not that. Sea scene.
Oh, my bad.
Sounds like I messed up B scene. But I was annoyed for far different reasons than you, Jack, because yours is I did not pick up that at all. I just thought these were all very stupid sailors who did not tie themselves to a part of the ship as sailors will do in a storm.
And if it were a storm. And that's why I picked up on Siren, because I thought that he would be the most superstitious one, and thus tie himself to the mast. And other people who were less superstitious would get swept away.
Was it not a storm?
It doesn't. It's unclear. Yeah. There was water that swept them. We don't know what happened. Sirens usually ram you, or in some versions control the sea into just like high waters. But either way, they drown the men, and the men happily will sometimes, just like the song, will draw them overboard, is one of the ways. But they put you in a dangerous situation where the ocean can swallow you, is the gist across the board. And so I gave the benefit of the doubt that if we're in good sailing conditions and he has tied himself to the mast and others haven't, then it's because of the superstition. Especially which we've set up that witches are in some form or fashion real in this world.
Well, and I think that's I think the point here, because I had a completely different reading of it. I read it as there was a storm. It basically just destroyed the ship and everything. Well, not destroyed the ship, because obviously the ship still sailed because he made it back. But like, it swept everyone overboard and he was the only one left. And it was because he was the only one with any foresight to tie himself to the mast, even though he tied himself by his hands, which now that you're saying sirens, I'm like, yeah, that would probably be smart because he would have tied himself with his hands.
To stop himself from untying it.
Yeah, to stop himself from, because I was like, why in the world would you tie yourself by your hands? That's very
Because
stupid.
Otherwise you have someone else tie you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then the stupid thing is, okay, so then it's kind of hailing back to like Odysseus and the whole thing with the sirens that he did where he tied himself to the mast and then he listened to the siren's song. But the crew stuffed their ears full of wool, I think it was. And they specifically did not listen to the siren's song. So if they're like half reenacting the thing from Odysseus, then they are very stupid, and my point still stands.
I think that...
So clarification is key.
I think that the overall point is that there was a lot going on and none of it was clear enough for us to follow.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, lots of different readings and not in a good way. Yeah, I think the other thing that really stuck out to me that is another kind of warning of because I do think that this author, as we've kind of pointed out, is clearly at a level where they need to start being very deliberate with their craft, because it feels like what point they're at right now is very good natural writer. Like, this is kind of what comes out. And maybe they do a little bit of editing on it, maybe, make some changes and stuff like that to kind of, make it really how they want it to be. But they aren't really thinking about it from the standpoint of editing. And when I say editing, I mean these editing points of, like, what are you presenting to the reader? How are your characterizations coming across? Are your sentences internally consistent? What is what's the imagery that you're presenting to the audience? Is that clear? Are you frustrating them? Are you achieving what you want to achieve with any given sentence or paragraph or, even word? Because it's also one of those things, like, there are some examples, Jack, like you said, where it's like that, the hemp, running along the hands and stuff. It's a really good, really tactile description. But then you get that 12 times. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, it's not good anymore then. You need other ways to describe things. And that means you have to break out of that box, and you have to kind of expand the way that you're thinking about it.
And expand your audience too. Like, I think what you're saying is true, and the impression that I got from reading from this author is that they have multiple people who read their work and enjoy it, and none of these people are better at writing than they are, and none of these people have a higher reading level or reading comprehension level than they do. So there is no one that they have that is better than them to catch the things that they cannot. And that's what they need. Always be in search of someone who is as good as or better than you at your craft, so that you can get that, you can get better. You can get people saying, hey, this sentence is inconsistent in the middle. Hey, this pacing that you don't know about yet, it's not jamming for these reasons. Like, they need to step out of their comfort zone of whoever is currently reading for them, who says this is pretty, and it is pretty, and find someone who can say, this is pretty, but.
Is it pretty, but as in, like, ass? Or is it pretty except?
I am not going to
dignify that with an answer.
Thank you. Dignify is the word that I was looking for. Sarah has just been, annexed to a corner, and we can continue on.
But I have another thing to say eventually.
You can say it when you're finished being annexed.
Exiled?
Maybe. What does annex even mean?
It's not what
it means. You're actually taking me over.
A building. Annex can refer to a building attached to a larger one, or a supplementary section of a document, or the act of incorporating a territory into a country. All right, then I'm doing that one. I am incorporating you into me and then shutting you down.
Okay, so she's got a long-term colonialization plan.
Yes.
She's colonizing you.
Correct.
Wow.
Sarah is now part of my country, and she is not allowed to trade ideas with the outside world.
Oh, no.
I think I'm going to engage in a revolution.
Someday. But for now, I think a big issue, too, that really needs to be focused on when moving forward, when editing this chapter, is that there's no clear goal. Like, even when I said, hey, she is running away from a monster, she's not running to anything, just away. We don't have any goal to reach that we think we could find safety, just not where the monster is. Mm-hmm. And so stating those goals clearly lets us know, as the readers, when we will be safe. It gives us something to look forward to and to grasp at. Running wildly at random doesn't give us any sense that this could end well or that it could end at all. And so having her say, I really want to get back to my parents, or having her say, I really want to, whatever she was doing beforehand, please let me fill this quickly, put the pail into the water quickly, please fill up quickly, I need to get back, I need to be safe, I want to be cuddled up in the carriage again. whatever it is. I need to find my path. It doesn't matter. And it would be even better if you keep the entire thing and don't cut just down to Cassandra. Where are we going? We keep saying that, like, oh, we're escaping. Apparently people probably thinking the daughter is a witch. We're going on this journey for a reason. But we have no goal. We don't know why. Are we just traveling through this wood? Is this wood our destination? Are we trying to find another witch? And so we were actually looking for the dead Yarrow and the whatever else because we think that maybe someone else won't react so badly to our daughter who weird things are happening around. Like, what is our goal? What are we looking for and trying to do? Because that will give readers something to latch onto and push the situation forward and have us turning pages. But also it'll characterize your characters better and make us care about them because they have something something they want that then readers can say, we also want that for them. Right now, she's running away. She's scared. There's something that's chasing her. And if she dies, I don't know. I don't care. I know nothing about her aside from the fact that she is a girl of indeterminable young age. I don't care. Give me more about who she is and what she wants so that I know what we have to lose.
Am I still annexed?
Yes, but you're allowed to trade with other countries. So go ahead and speak.
Wow. Thank you. No, I think you're right on that. And I think as far as the recommendations of what to change in the chapter, like you said, focusing on the child because that gives you enough. Because another thing is it seems like we want to include everything all at once. And that's another kind of instinct of a lot of writers is we have to include everything. Because as soon as we have this character, we need to give you some backstory. As soon as we have this situation, we need to explain, some of what the situation entails.
And there is a weird writing loophole here that's incorrect, where it feels like they believe that if you are showing and not telling, then it can't be exposition. The majority of this chapter is exposition, even though they didn't strictly tell us anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's showing exposition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's what really should be done in a rewrite of this. And then I think focusing on what you can cut out, what you can cut down, focusing on the internal consistency of the sentences. Another thing that I really missed in this was a connection between the tactile details and how a person would actually experience them. I think that came to light most when Cassandra was running away from the monster. There's a point where moss trails cold over her neck like a noose or something along those lines. And that already is repetitious of something that her dad experienced earlier in the chapter with moss trailing cold or something along those lines. So that alone was already a kind of like no.
And I will say I did really like it the first time in the chapter when it was that moss from the trees swaying over his shoulder. That one was good. Mm-hmm. Just don't do it again.
Yes. Well, and also, you're not going to feel it because whenever you are running from a monster through the woods, the experience is so focused on survival, the adrenaline dump. Like people, it's astonishing when you go through an adrenaline dump, the things you do not pick up until after it fades. It's just crazy. Like you may feel some pain of being scratched by brambles on your arms, but you're not going to notice that you're bleeding probably because you're being chased by an actual like demonic thing, horrible thing through the woods. Like everything in your body is screaming to run, to get away, to survive. Like this is flight to the utmost degree. And one of the biggest problems is that we still get the tactile details as if this person is not experiencing an adrenaline dump.
The only tactile details should be things that get in our way. A stone that we trip over. A branch that makes it so that we roll our ankle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say to the author's credit, the sentences did pick up pace a little bit at that point. They were a little bit shorter. It's just that they're so long usually that it wasn't enough. And there's still all of that detail that you guys are mentioning that would not be there if they're just focused on trying not to get caught by this demon thing.
Length of a sentence does a big factor in determining pacing. So fight scenes, sex scenes, chase scenes use short, choppy sentences to make it go faster.
Yeah, and that's just one of those sort of like basic, general, like, this is a really good way to handle this. And obviously, you can add in longer sentences. Sometimes people lean really, really too hard that way, and they're like, you could only use short sentences. That's not true. You can use, but you do want to have this quick pace, and you usually want to have quick actions defined in each sentence. Because again, we're thinking about the function of each sentence. What is it doing? How is it added on brick by brick to this wall that you're building? Like, you have to think those things through. What function is this particular thing serving? And it's just one of those things, like, but that's sort of why I went to this divorce between the tactile details and how people would actually experience them. Because we're so married to this idea that we want to have, this description that way and things like that, that we're forgetting about how somebody actually experiences a thing. We're not taking the time to interrogate that, whether or not we are properly getting our readers to understand the character's experience in this moment. And that's a really, really big detail that, I don't think we could overlook.
And I'll also, in case this is where the author heads with this, because it feels like they are in that mode of trying to emulate older books, older versions of horror, and how they do have that slower pace and those longer sentences and those big descriptor factors even in the climactic scenes and the biggest horror moments. I will also say that the majority of those are psychological horrors with a psychological emphasis on what we are afraid of and how we are reacting. And there are two different types of tension. There are a lot of different types of tension, but for the purposes of this, a psychological tension is very, very different from a physical tension, especially one where we are trying to get away from it. Pain and running and thinking that we have to escape a physical danger does not do the same thing as psychological horror. It's very different if we were trapped in a room or if we're looking at a monster and thinking, how can I get away from it while our body is moving toward it? That is slow, that is trapped in our head, and thus you can have those longer sentences while maintaining technically a physical threat, but it's very psychological in its damage. This is all physical that we're going through, and that's what Sarah means when she's really honing in on like, hey, you're not going to feel this if you're in this adrenaline rush.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good distinction. That's why that works in that context as opposed to more modern horror where it is the chase, the fight, the adrenaline, the blood, the gore. Like, there's a reason why we write things differently whenever we're trying to portray that as opposed to, like you said, the psychological horror. If you read like H.P. Lovecraft, excellent prose that is very, very lingering, is very like, but it's terrifying. And the reason why is because it is that psychological side of things. Whereas if you're, I'm not super versed in horror as a general genre because I don't read a ton of it. But it is one of those things where, like, if you're talking about though the physical horror of like being gutted to death or something along those lines, like Until Dawn. I've seen that game.
Great job. You've seen the game.
Shut up.
I
just couldn't play
saying
it.
What you
it's
said.
Terrifying.
You're just hearing it for the first time.
No, it's just whenever you say it with a mocking quality to your voice, it sounds different.
No,
okay?
I've seen the game too.
Look, it's a very cinematic game. So
yes,
whatever.
Go on.
My point was that if you were going to write what was happening in that game on, as a story, you weren't going to write it the same way that you write Frankenstein or the same way that you write A Color Out of Space. It's just completely different because the source of tension, as you've pointed out, is very, very different.
And I will say, too, that just the way they described this, I'm expecting a twist later on where whatever's chasing us now, not maybe whatever we're surrounded by, I don't know what that is yet, but the figure that just keeps saying no in a pleading voice is probably a friend and trying to stop us from doing something that's going to screw us over later. They seem like a friendly beast, whatever they are, that just is somehow shackled to not. And that could be right or wrong, but that's my impression of it.
It seemed to me like it was a weird mirrorverse image of herself, like trying to help herself.
That's what I was thinking, like from the future, trying to stop her from doing something else. And I was like, maybe because we had that prologue of the other witch who hung herself because she was so sad and this person's also being chased off for being a witch, then maybe she's like, don't make my mistakes, or I'm ghostly and thus know things you don't, so don't do whatever you're about to do. But either way, it seemed like someone who was helpful. Because that's the impression I got, and also the impression that Jess got. I don't know about Sarah yet. It's worth noting that if that's supposed to be a reveal or something that you don't want people to think, then it was my first thought.
My first thought, and I was I guess my thought was like, this will be really weird if you read the prologue. If you didn't read the prologue and you just got that, I don't think it would have felt as weird. But I automatically assumed the figure she saw was the ghost of the witch who hung herself, or the non-witch who hung herself. I really don't know what we're supposed to think if she is actually a witch or not. But my point is, I thought that this figure was the ghost of the witch who hung herself. And because of that, I was like, why in the world would this not witch have any animus toward this child? Like, why would she be behaving? Like, why would her ghost be doing this? Now, it makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. Once you said that, I'm like, it clicked. And I'm like, yes, I think that's probably going to be the twist. This figure was trying to be friendly and is just terrifying looking.
And they're just, and it's that attempted dichotomy. Attempted contradiction in how they say it, because the no's are always first something that's sad and something that you would have with someone who is upset about something that is about to happen. Someone who is generally helpful, sad people telling you no usually aren't trying to hurt you. And then it gives some sort of horrific way to describe it. So no, a plea that broke into a sob, echoing long and loud, a sound that clawed the sky and would not fade, driving her forward as madness bled into its gaze. And then let's just pop over to the other no. A guttural no that tore from its throat, raw and anguished, a plea echoing off the pines like a scream from Cassie's nightmares, sinking claws into her bones, a sound that gnawed her skull with raw terror. So they are first sad and sorrowful and pleading, and then something that, no wait, but it sounds really scary too.
Well, there's another no in the middle too, and that one is the figure's cry, no, split the air again, a howl she could not outrun, weaving through the dusk like a dirge, threading her marrow with dread.
Yeah, so that one's just spook.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, you could kind of see like a double meaning there of like, it's like a dirge, but is it a dirge because the thing is after you, or that it sees something bad in your future and it's mourning that? You see what I'm saying?
I just learned I don't know how to pronounce dirge.
Yeah, a dirge, for those who don't know, a dirge is a lament for the dead, especially one forming part of a funeral rite. So yeah, absolutely. The only word I know dirge from is Dirge of Cerberus, a game that I have both seen and played.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
spicy.
He's special. Jeez. Now, Jess, how did you pronounce it?
Just a harder
I
G. Like, still a soft G, but a harder, like, dirge. Yeah.
Dirge?
Yeah.
Dirge.
It was like doge, but with instead of O.
Let's get a bit more structured at this point. Just going through our questions. Did the characters feel real, and did you care about them? I think physically, because of the tactile descriptions, I would say they felt like they really were in a physical place. Mm-hmm. But as for having characterization, no, because I don't know anything about what they want or care about or fear or why they exist. They just are people who are in a place.
It felt a little too like the author is trying to drop subtle hints, or like not subtle, but like cryptic hints about their past and the things they've gone through to too much of a degree, and so I wasn't able to actually form a bond with them like I would be able to if more time was spent actually like helping me to understand what they've been through and who they are.
And they also, in line with them trying to keep tension, them being the author continuously, they only gave us traumatic hints. There was nothing that said we had a happy home life that we got chased from, or that we still love each other so much, or that we really actually just love picking herbs, whatever. All of them were sad or ominous or bad things. And so while trauma is a way to bond with a character, you can't do it all the time with everyone, with nothing. There's nothing to contrast against it.
I agree with that 100%.
See, I'm going to say that I think that Ernest and Cassandra both felt like characters that existed. The mom felt like a Pokemon.
Oh, God.
Well, like,
I'm going to need some more on that.
Like, you deploy her at will to, like, read the herbs, and then that's the only time she really exists. Like, you, like, throw her out there, and then she comes back. But she didn't really feel like she existed for a lot of it. Like, she was kind of there sometimes, but, like...
Yeah, she was just giving us definitions of, this ominous thing that if you read and know a lot about witchy things, then you know that these plants and, like, the dying plants around things and the air souring and whatever else, like, these are all signs of witches, and she's the only one that actively notes this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but it just doesn't really feel like she's there otherwise. Like, even when... the Ernest had nodded to Iris and then stated that are the minions watching us, no reason to be spooked. Even in that description, if you go through and kind of like read it through again, she is like, other than him addressing her, she's not there. She's literally like, I assume, sitting right next to him, and she's not present there. She just doesn't exist. We get all the horse details, we get the sea details, we get all the other things. We do not feel her presence next to us as Ernest. And that's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that because it's kind of feels like it's going for like an omniscient point of view, and you get like a lot more of Ernest's past with the shipwreck and Cassandra's past with the stuff that happened in Danvers. And the mom, I think there might have been like... Yeah, I think what we got about her was from Cassandra's point of view. It was like mom fought them with words and dad fought them with fists or whatever. Not in those exact words, but you know what I mean. And
yeah,
so Cassandra wasn't actually delved into like the others were, which is weird for an omniscient point of view, I feel.
And I think one of those is just that, like Sarah has said, the focus is more on the writing than the story or the characters. Where it's just that we were supposed to go into this character's backstory and what they're doing, and then we go into this character's backstory and what they're doing. So there wasn't really an attention paid to, but this scene is actively going on, regardless of who the spotlight is on, and they are all there together, interacting and existing, even if the spotlight is not on them. They kind of stepped back out of it like they were on stage and someone else had an aside.
Yeah.
Was the setting clear? I would say again both yes and no, where it definitely felt like the woods, but there was no direction to go to. There was no end or beginning to the woods, and not in a spooky good way where we think there should be an end or beginning. It just felt like this wasn't a real woods. It was just Coraline style being made as we walked.
It felt like watching it on a stage where it's like the wheels turn, but they stay stationary and like the scenery like passes by them. Like it, and I think that's the thing, is every single time we came back into the present, it felt like we were in a scene and there was no connection to the world really. It was a new set piece.
And that again, that's a consequence of having no goals because there's nowhere to go to. It's still the woods, and it's not even the woods specifically different from the previous woods. Now it's a clearing. Now it's got firs. Now the river is gone. Whatever it is, it's always just the woods?
I felt that the setting had moments of clarity, but there was just so much the sentences going on that it was also easy to get lost. So yeah, same thing. It was good and bad and depended on the moment.
I think we already talked a lot about how the pacing hit or didn't hit in this case. Was there an inciting incident?
Yes, it was late though.
Mm-hmm.
And it was setting up an idiot plot. An idiot plot is where the story and the plot only works if everyone, as far as the characters go, are idiots. So you're terrified in this woods and bad things are clearly out there, and your wife has read the herbs so many times and there's bad things out there and everyone's very certain about this. And yet we send our child off into the woods alone to fetch water because that's reasonable. And so technically, yes, that is an inciting incident, but it is an inciting incident that would tell me as a reader that this is going to be an idiot plot. And I would be very frustrated by that.
To add on to that, combine that with Jack's point earlier about the child is not running anywhere. The child is like there's panic, but there's even in a moment of like severe panic, the kid's going to want to run towards safety, and to the child, safety should be the parents. And if it's not, it should be something. There should be a goal.
And I would say, yes, there's an inciting incident. Obviously, when the monster appears, I equally don't, it comes too late, and I don't like the inciting incident, but it's for the same reason that I don't like a lot of books trying to be movies inciting incidents, because starting with a big physical-ish, at this point, we're being quote-unquote chased by something, attack, we don't care yet. We don't, and we're so conditioned currently by movies, and we know it's a book, but movies, media in general, influences our expectations. And in horror, someone dying in the first chapter happens all the time. And so the second that you have someone attack in the very first chapter with some physical thing happening, then I kind of flip off just my ability to care for this person, because, you know, maybe they're just going to die and I'm not supposed to care. And so why would I get worked up over it? Maybe they're just here to be like, look what a scary monster the monster is.
Yeah.
And so having something big and physical in that very first chapter as your inciting incident has the opposite effect.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. It's basically like we're told so often that we have to kind of treat all these characters as red shirts. And when I say red shirts, I mean the red shirts on Star Trek that are the ones that always die. It is just like you don't want to get, like, there's just no incentive to get emotionally invested or attached.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good way to put it. Because it is one of those things, like, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms until you just said it, but you're right, that's exactly the expectation that it's setting. And so it's just like, well, then why should I care? Why should I get worked up?
Yeah. And a psychological thing happening in the first chapter hits completely different. So if we just had something appear and seem very ominous to us and seem like it was threatening but not coming after us, that gives more main character vibes. Something has locked onto us and it's frightening. The physical attack of this monster, which we seem very clearly incapable of fending off because we're some level of child and our first instinct is to jump into a river. So it feels like we're going to die, not that we're the main character.
I just had an epiphany. I think this may actually be a case of bad advice. And let me explain that really quickly. We have the benefit of the author's biographical information, and a lot of it, the description focuses on, you know, explorations of the human psyche and the weight of inherited curses, I think, are both phrases in it. That's all psychological, and that seems like it is what the author wants to pursue, is psychological horror. Yep, that's my suspicion. Yeah, and people get advice like that all the time. It's very frustrating because bad writing advice is just bandied about like nobody's business. I suspect that's what happens because it feels like that. It kind of has that tacked on, like, we need something to happen, so it's gonna like kind of pop out and happen all of a sudden. It didn't feel like it even fit with the flow of the chapter, and I could be wrong. I could be making it up. And
Correct. No, I obviously we don't know if this is what happened with the author, but the tacked on bit, the band-aided on bit definitely feels there, especially because we have so much care sewn into this girl at the beginning, where we're stroking her hair while she sleeps and continually looking at her and how she's rested. And then we're just like, all right, and off with you.
Yeah. So I would suggest that that's a possibility. And the only reason too, and this is another thing for kind of the audience to understand, one of the reasons why I'm coming to that conclusion is because we've seen this kind of advice being passed around a lot. You know, all of us, like combined, we probably have like 30, 40 years of experience in writing and writing groups and, critique and stuff like that. Maybe more. I don't know. But the thing is, you start to hear these things a lot, and it's kind of one of those low-hanging fruit sort of mistake bits of feedback that people give when they don't necessarily understand a piece. And something that is a slow psychological horror is one of the genres that I would say is most often misunderstood, because a lot of people just have no idea how to give advice for it. So on that note, though, I think it would be like, depending on what the story is, that's the story determines what your inciting incident is. What I would probably suggest to this author is to examine what your story is, what your actual story arc is, and what your actual inciting incident needs to be, and then let that happen in a psychological horror way, and abandon this, monster pops out of things and chases the girl. And
See, and so again, movie terms, because people tend to understand them more. Tension-wise, this is similar to if you used a psychological build-up to set up for a jump scare. They're very different, and also you've just wasted all the psychological build-up, because then our tension is bled out by the jump scare. This feels like how, if I were to guess how this scene would naturally have played out with the monster, then I would say it would be something like she hears something, she turns, she sees the monster, and it does have that sort of like eeriness to it, where it's not moving toward her, but it's terrifying, and it does maybe raise its hand, and it says no, and she backs away a bit and drops the pail, and it tells her no, and then she slips into the river. And so sort of if the monster turns out to be good and to be an omen warning her, then it is sort of that self-fulfilling prophecy of it's you trying to stop her from doing this that causes her to do this. Mm-hmm. That would fit with the psychological horror, where we still end up in a wrong bad spot and have this place definitely is haunted of sorts or monstrous of sorts, but it utilizes the slow scare and the human error rather than and now we're in a chase scene.
Mm-hmm. One thing too, this is actually a quick question. Did this happen during the day or at night?
Dunno.
Presumably at night, because I think they stopped for the night.
Okay. So I would also suggest, because you do have that problem, and this is something that the author is going to have to contend with, is why would they send off their daughter in the midst of these spooky, spooky woods at night? Especially also, like, another thing is, you've already brought in the idea that there are potentially hostile tribes or non-hostile tribes that live in this area as well. And one of the things that you probably would know, studying, any sort of early American history, is that really, really bad things could happen if you got captured by the wrong tribe. So that's another reason why you wouldn't necessarily send your children off alone into the woods, especially if you'd already seen and suspected you were being trailed by any Native Americans at that time, because this is also a time when they were at war actively, in some cases, with the American government, presumably. based on what the time period feels like. So that's just another thing to kind of note, is that you're giving us these details that kind of feed us that information. And again, it just seems really odd to send a child off once you have established that.
So we may have read this wrong, and it may even make less sense by what it's actually saying, because we are by the river. She says she had watched longer at the creek, kneeling by Iris as her mother sifted the herbs, her eyes tracing the water's edge, seeing shapes in the ripples, a face unnaturally pale, eyes suspiciously deep. Nearly Cassie, Ernest said now, his smile forced tight at the edges, a mask over unease clawing at his gut, his tone sharpening as he pointed to the river, that making it seem like it is in visibility, its roar growl beneath his words, fetch water for us, pails there, do not wander off too far. So it seems like they would be able to see her while all of this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, it's even odder that they just vanished from the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she trudged toward the bank, and now she's at the bank, and then we get... So it seems like she is within viewing distance of her parents while all of this is happening somehow, but I have no idea how that would work.
See, I thought that too. I whenever I was reading through it and she's like running, I was just like, she is right there from what I had recollected. But it's one of those things, since we're not given that, I was like, well, I'm going to treat it as what we are given, which is that she's far, far away. So it would be great though, honestly, if she was like right there, right next to him. But also, why would he tell her to not wander off if they can see her?
And if she is a certain level of young, then don't wander off makes sense.
Yeah.
The problem then is extra. We need that note of her having a goal of get back to the parents. If she is looking for them and suddenly they're not there, the cart's not there, the horse isn't there, or she's trying to run to them, but she's not getting any closer, or the trees seem to be getting in the way. Like, why can't she get to them? Why aren't they reacting? We need those details if she's that close. Or we need to know why she's not close.
Yeah, but if we implemented the thing that you said, where it's like she sees something, it says no, because we can assume that maybe she's the only one who can see or hear this apparition. That's fine.
Yeah, and people slip into water all the time,
Yes.
especially children.
Yeah, and so if that happens, then that would be a really good thing, especially if her parents are right there, because then we've already established that this river is like kind of rushing in a torrential kind of like thing. She's just gone. And then they can react. They can see it. I mean, her dad can have I watched the sea sweep away my entire crew, and now my daughter is getting swept away by water too. Trauma.
Or they could also have the moment, because it happens so fast that they just might not see it. And because they are already leaning toward witchcraft, then they think that she is not carried off by the river, and they go in the opposite direction, thinking that she's been taken by whatever mystical thing is in the forest.
And they may not have heard the splash.
Which is, because it's a rushing river anyway. And so there are a lot of ways you could go with that to keep on with whatever you're doing next.
Yes, with the psychological horror element. And that's, I think, the key. I'm done.
I love it.
And also from this, clarify, again, those details, that distance that we as the readers don't know how far she is from her parents, or if they can still see each other while all of this is happening. You've kind of white boxed it, even though you have, and white boxing is when everything, your background turns into a white box. Even with all of this description, things that should be there, or things that should specifically not be there, whether or not we can see the parents, how far they are gone. They just kind of vanished so that the scene could continue in whatever way you wanted. Make sure we know where our other characters have gone and how far, and if we can see them or not.
Yeah. Well, and we're actually actively getting contradicting details. And I would say that's even a little bit worse, because we had one thing told to us, and then we have another thing being told to us later. And that does happen several times. So it's another thing where it's like, there's a reason why Shakespeare's little famous thing of brevity is the soul of wit. The reason why he said that is not just because it's like, oh, the smarter or better you are, the smaller space you need to express your thoughts. It's because you're going to not contradict yourself by putting too many things together. That's it. That's a huge part of it. And then you come across as much wittier.
And we have already kind of hammered in whether or not the stakes and goals are clear, and that they are not, and it has hurt the flow of this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Did it fit genre expectation? I will say yes on that. This does fit very firmly into a Southern Gothic horror. More Gothic horror than Southern Gothic, but that would come later.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Me too.
Would you read more?
I would not, because it's the repetition is just too much for me. I do agree that the author has a lot of promising elements to their writing style, and they can do really good description, but there's just too much, and it's the same stuff over and over. I would not keep going.
I'd say with a very firm line edit and a move back into psychological horror, then I probably would, because it's an interesting setup, interesting genre, interesting, like it would just be kind of fun. Like if I was feeling like reading something like that, it would be enjoyable. But it desperately needs that line edit. It desperately needs like every single thing that we have so far. The prologue needs to be cut down to about 1 page, 1.5 pages if we're going to be generous. The first chapter should probably be cut down about, again, by probably like half to 75% in just line edits. That means taking things out, cutting things down, like, and if that happened, and again, we kind of lose that like horror movie, like, oh, I'm being chased by the monsters, you know what I mean? And it really settles into its genre, then I would keep reading it, because like you said, that I would trust at least that this writer has the skill to pull something fun off.
Yeah, I would agree with you with the very firm line edits, cutting down so that there's only one description for each thing. Use that 3 descriptor bit very sparingly so that it actually has an impact. Cut down things that don't matter or don't matter yet. You only need in this chapter what's necessary to understand the next chapter. If this were just sitting on my shelf already, I would probably read more, but I would do so skimming at its current state.
Yeah.
I would see all the description. I would skim over the description to get to where something interesting happens, and then I would continue to skim until I got the gist of something interesting. And if it caught me enough to want to go back and see what actually I was skimming over, maybe. But I would move forward at a skimming pace. I would not buy the book at its current state, largely because I would feel the need to skim over so much dense description.
Yeah, and to clarify, I based my judgment on the fact that this was meant to be a final draft.
Oh yeah.
I do think that there is promise and that it could be edited to a point where it is a very interesting read that would hook me in. But in the state that it exists now, even if it was on my shelf, I would not read it.
And that's fair. I'm a horror fan.
It did say there's 1 revision remaining. So if that revision is a very sincere line edit, then maybe.
I was under the impression that it would be a proofread just because of a couple of typos. But who knows? We can be hopeful about it.
We can be hopeful.
That it's 1 developmental edit. Do we have any feedback outside of what we've talked about geared toward helping the author improve?
I think just that, and this is something I'm going to give this a bit of advice because it is an instinct I also have. You have to learn to rein yourself in. I have the tendency to, my little fun thing is that I will repeat the same thing over and over and over again in different phrasings until I find the phrasing that I like, or I'll repeat a situation until I get the emotional resonance that I like. The problem is I have to then go back and cut all those other things out that were kind of the experiments leading up to the success. And it's just one of those things I've learned I have to rein myself in that way. And I think because of the distinct style that is being presented on the page right now, that is the same recommendation I would make for this author as well. Learn to rein yourself in. Learn to show some restraint, because you don't have a problem with putting things on the page. You have a problem with restraining then and cutting back to what really should be there.
Sounds like really good advice to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a font of wisdom until I was annexed by Jack.
No, I let you go again a while ago.
Oh!
It was just too much paperwork to actually file through.
Oh, that explains why all my infrastructure is collapsing.
You're welcome. So I would say find a focal point. And this, just the fact that it is some level of omniscient point of view does not stop you from having a focal point. If anything, that should make it easier to say, and look, all of these things are happening, but we're paying the most attention here. Because readers are not good at just taking in all information and discerning what should matter. We have to have something that we follow, something that we look forward to, something that we know is more important, a priority list, a hierarchy, than other things. From this, I can't tell what our focal point is, and I can't tell that the author knows what the focal point is, rather than just that they like all of it and they want the whole picture to always be there. Even when you are playing a game, when you are watching something, we don't just get a wide panel shot of everything. We have someone at center screen. We have someone that we are looking at. And I wouldn't be surprised if the next chapter started with the mom talking about what happened back at the town, or if it was about what kind of herbs there were, or if we just walked along the river. None of that would surprise me, because I don't, even with the daughter is chased by the monster, I don't know if we're going to end up back with the daughter in the next chapter.
There's no expectations really set.
No part of me would be surprised if the dad is the main character and the child is just our setting off point. I don't know. And so find that focal point and make sure that it is incredibly clear to everyone picking up this book at any point in time where our focus should be.
I definitely agree with that.
I don't have anything outside of what we've already covered.
Okay, then this was The Curses We Keep by DakotaJ Miller. Thank you for joining us for today's session of Edit Like You Mean It. As a reminder, if you do want to submit a chapter or manuscript of your own, please check the link below and remember to like and subscribe.